Well, hello there, and welcome to episode 14, part 2 of the Quadruple D. And this segment is what I call the Fetid Fever Dream flashback of the week. And we're actually looking at Elijah Muhammad in a controversial look at one of his major scandals. Now, Elijah Muhammad was the leader of the Nation of Islam, or the NOI. He was the face of the organization in many ways, and the Nation of Islam. I addressed them in the other part of the episode. I talked about Louis Farrakhan and why it was questionable at best for Eric Adams to at one point recommend having Louis Farrakhan's organization, the Nation of Islam, provide, you know, uh, some sort of security for the neighborhoods in New York City. I was raising my eyebrow about that. And, you know, Eric Adams is running for office in New York again, despite his scandals. And I, I kind of stumbled into this little bit of a rabbit hole about the Nation of Islam because I learned that about Eric Adams. I was like, what? You know? So I again don't want to be unfair to the Nation of Islam, or in this case Elijah Muhammad. But the comments that I have to make, I think they're going to be fair. I think they will be fair. So the biggest scandal involving Elijah Muhammad was the revelation that he had multiple extramarital affairs with young female secretaries, some of whom bore his children. This controversy became public largely due to Malcolm X, who exposed it after his falling out with the Nation of Islam in 1963, and the scandal deeply shook the movement as Elijah Muhammad had built his leadership on strict moral codes. Imagine that, including prohibitions on adultery. Well, what do you know? He had prohibitions on others, yet he was going around and engaging in scandalous behavior himself. Why does that sound familiar? So, this happens a lot in organizations like this that proclaim to be morally righteous and all that. They often end up having these types of scandals exposed among the leadership, who are often depicting themselves as these paragons of virtue. And they will, in fact, demonize not only outsiders, but members of their own group if they sometimes violate the codes that are being, you know, whip cracked from above. So, my perception of the scandal, I consider it, to be a sane viewpoint. Others might disagree, but this scandal to me reflects the broader problem of hierarchical power structures, especially those built around charismatic authority. So here's how I think it should be assessed. There's the angle of power and hypocrisy, as I already hinted at. Elijah Muhammad maintained a rigid moral order for followers while violating it himself. Well, how convenient. And sensible people, in my opinion, critique this as an inherent issue with centralized leadership. Rules are often enforced on the rank and file, while the elites operate by a different set of standards. Often there are no standards, in fact, for the millionth time. This has been revealed as true, in in the current administration. Like uh, the Trump administration. They don't hold themselves to the standards that they claim to hold for others, right? And what do you know? That's also been true of the Nation of Islam, and it's part of why Malcolm X, to his credit, left. He actually did have perhaps some moral standards that he developed, and he was like, you know what, I'm walking away from this. And he was, of course, assassinated later on. Some people say that it was actually the U.S. government that assassinated Malcolm X, but others say that it might have been, you know, the people that he was aligned with previously that he was stepping away from. So there's also the angle of patriarchy and control. So I've probably said things that could have pissed off feminists in the past, and I will do so in the future, I'm sure, because there's some people who all they ever do is finger wag at people, especially the people who are kind of on their side, but they might step out of line, say the wrong thing here and there, and what do you know, you got to wag your finger at them. But in this case, I actually do side with the feminists quite plainly, you know with the caveat that there is no single monolithic thing called the patriarchy that controls everything, right? There are individual patriarchal organizations and patriarchal people on the planet. It's not just some sort of like godlike invisible figure that's, somehow pulling all of the strings or whatever. There are individual organizations like the Catholic Church would be one, and of course, the Nation of Islam is apparently one. They do control the women, I guess you could say. The NOI's structure placed women in a subordinate role, limiting their autonomy, at least from what I understand. If you disagree with that assessment, go ahead and let me know in the comments. If you think I'm being unfair, or if you defend the organization in general, go ahead and let me know. I'm not I'm not going to criticize literally every aspect of them, or even every aspect of an individual that I talk about, like Elijah Muhammad. I'm of the belief that people, they can do some good things, they can do some bad things. That's kind of the way that human history works, either individually or when it comes to societies or organizations within that society. You could be a mafia crime boss, but still donate to charity. That might be a pretty good example of what I'm talking about here. But this scandal really shows how patriarchal power within religious movements often leads to exploitation and coercion, and just sexual scandals, possibly abuse scandals. That's a reason that Malcolm X left again, or at least a purported reason. I don't know the full story there, but it's apparently one of the reasons. So you've also got the angle of authoritarianism versus autonomy. The NOI under Elijah Muhammad functioned as a rigid top-down organization with strict discipline. Again, strict discipline for others, not so much for Mr. Muhammad. Even though he might have put on the act in public that he was being strictly disciplined, but at the end of the day, rules are there to be broken, especially by those at the top who feel they can get away with it, with the hypocrisy and the double standards. As one of my buddies says, two standards is better than one. So I think real progressives advocate a more decentralized, non hierarchical structure where individuals hold leaders accountable, something that was almost impossible within the Nation of Islam due to Elijah's near messianic status, right? If you're God at the top, or if you present yourself as somebody who has God on his or her side, well, then maybe some people think, oh, this person can't do anything wrong. They're, a flawless figure, almost akin to the holy deity themselves. Their poop doesn't stink. That sort of thing. And you got to watch out for that in any organization. So, in a way, when I'm sort of picking on the Nation of Islam here, it's not just about the Nation of Islam. I'm kind of intending to make a comment about organizations in general. If you have somebody who's sort of messianic and they're holier than thou and they act like, they've never done anything wrong in their life, they've never even said anything wrong, well, then you have to kind of raise an eyebrow or two and sort of reassess the situation because they're probably full of bologna sausage, right? So there's also the betrayal of the collective struggle that they purport to be all about, highlighting and all that. So the Nation of Islam positioned itself as a revolutionary force for black liberation or a number of assorted claims. However, the scandal showed how internal corruption and unchecked power can undermine movements, making them serve leaders rather than people. And of course, because it's an organization that has an impact on the world and makes claims about the world, you can always call into question an organization. I don't care what anybody says. You shouldn't care what I say. It should just be a given fact that because you have a brain and you exist on this planet, you should be able to question what an organization does. You should be able to question what a religion does or a religious claim maintains about the world because keep in mind, they're also talking about the world that you inhabit. They're making claims about your universe. And in some cases, these organizations might actually have power over you or, the community in which you live. So it's up to you to decide, should I question this organization at all, or is everything they say and do legit? You know, because in my opinion, there might be reason to question literally any organization about something. I'm not saying that no organization has legitimacy. That would be just as dumb as saying, uh, everything is legitimate. You can't abolish anything and everything, right? That's not a very sensible position. It's no worse than saying, oh, everything's fine. There's nothing wrong in the world. To say that, oh, everything, you know, everything is wrong. There's got to be some middle ground somewhere. But at the same time, there are definitely a lot of legitimate critiques, and it's ultimately up to us individually to decide. What do I want to believe about this? What aspect of this is true? What aspect of it might be, a partially true claim? How much of this am I willing to withstand if it's like a negative thing, if it's a harmful policy that an organization has. So again, I'm not saying that, everything about the Nation of Islam is bad or everything about the US government is bad or literally everything about corporations is bad. But some things are. Some things are. You know, it doesn't make you a freak or a radical to use your brain and come up with certain critiques of things. At the same time, like I said, it's up to you to decide how you want to present yourself when it comes to criticizing this or that. It's not always the easiest thing to determine where you want to stand, and the presentation of ideas is actually kind of important. Of course, it's partly how people will perceive you. It's partly how you will perceive yourself. In fact, so you do kind of have to be careful. And I'm trying to walk that fine line here in talking about Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. And, it's it's one of those things where you're never going to find the perfect balance between criticizing something and just saying, "Oh, I'm not going to talk about this at all." There's got to be a point where you're able to actually find sort of a happy medium. Anyway, from a sensible lens, the scandal, the sleeping around scandal, apparently there was some sexual abuse allegations as well. But it wasn't just personal misconduct, it was in some ways a symptom of the broader problems that arise in centralized authoritarian movements. A decentralized, accountable movement, free from rigid hierarchies, might have avoided such abuses and stayed true to more of its better ideals. So I didn't go over, some of the aspects of, the Nation of Islam that might be relatively more positive. But if you wanna list those off to me, feel free to go on ahead and do that in a comments section, or if you can track down my email, which some people have, I guess you can go ahead and do that as well. It's not it's not necessarily the case that I will respond to you or make an episode about it, but if you want to go down that route, go ahead and let me know what your thoughts are. Well, anyway, I've said enough about this. Yeah, and you have a good day, and hopefully I didn't piss you off too much, or if I did, maybe I pissed you off in just the right way, and you'll do something positive about it. I don't know. We'll see.